I sat in the mahogany boardroom on the 42nd floor of the Renford Tower, watching the Seattle skyline stretch endlessly before me, as I signed the termination papers that would end my daughter's career with a single stroke of my pen. The irony wasn't lost on me. 26 years of raising a child who had just stolen my home while I lay unconscious on an operating table. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh. Never knowing that the mother she betrayed was the silent owner of the very company that had given her everything she thought she'd earned on her own merit. In my briefcase sat the deed transfer documents, each one bearing Haley's forged signature from 3 weeks ago when she sold my house for $800,000, while I was fighting for my life after emergency spinal surgery. 26 years of building a home, of creating a sanctuary filled with memories and love, liquidated by the daughter I'd raised to value family above all else, sold to fund what she called her dream investment opportunity, in a downtown Seattle condo that would never hold the warmth of the life we'd built together. But Haley Wallace had made one critical miscalculation in her betrayal. She had no idea that the woman lying helpless in that hospital bed wasn't just her mother. She was Rebecca Wells, the silent majority shareholder of Wallace and Associates Marketing, the prestigious firm where Haley had worked for the past 3 years, earning 6 figures and building the career that had made her feel entitled to steal from the woman who had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities. I never had. My name is Rebecca Wells, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I understood what unconditional love meant. I was the kind of mother who kept every report card, every art project, every soccer trophy displayed like sacred artifacts in a house that represented 26 years of single motherhood. I believed that love was measured in sacrifices made quietly, in college tuitions paid without complaint, in doors left unlocked because trust was the foundation of everything we had built together in our cozy Mercer Island home overlooking Lake Washington. I raised Haley in that house after her father, Paul Wallace, decided that fatherhood was incompatible with his dreams of traveling the world as a freelance photographer. The divorce was swift and bitter, leaving me with a 3-year-old daughter, a mortgage I could barely afford, and a determination to prove that a broken family could still create something beautiful. I took a job as a junior accountant at a small Seattle firm, working my way up through night school and weekend courses while Haley slept peacefully in her princess-themed bedroom. But what my daughter never knew was that her mother had inherited more than just emotional resilience from her grandmother Arla Wells. When grandmother Arla passed away during Haley's freshman year of high school, she left me not just her vintage jewelry and family photographs, but a substantial trust fund that I had invested carefully and quietly over the years. By the time Haley graduated college, I had parlayed that inheritance into majority ownership of 3 successful Seattle businesses, including the marketing firm where my daughter would eventually land her dream job. I never told Haley about the businesses, because I wanted her to succeed on her own merit. I wanted her to experience the satisfaction of earning her achievements through talent and hard work, not through maternal connections. When she applied to Wallace and Associates, I quietly recused myself from the hiring process, ensuring that she was evaluated purely on her qualifications. When she excelled in her role as a senior marketing coordinator, I felt the pride of a mother whose child had succeeded independently, never knowing that her success was unfolding under the protective umbrella of her mother's silent influence. For 26 years, I made it my mission to give Haley everything I never had, not just material things, though I provided those too, but something deeper: stability, security, the knowledge that someone loved her enough to plan for her future even when planning meant eating ramen noodles for dinner, so her college fund could grow by another $50. I never remarried, though there were opportunities. There was Archer Sully, the gentle veterinarian who asked me to dinner after treating our golden retriever Max. There was Toby Renford, the contractor who renovated our kitchen and lingered over coffee, talking about his dreams of expanding his business. But Haley was my priority, and I convinced myself that romantic love was a luxury I could postpone indefinitely. My love had a purpose, a direction, and it flowed entirely toward the brilliant, ambitious young woman who called me mom and brought friends home without embarrassment, who talked to me about her workplace challenges, and celebrated her promotions with champagne dinners at our favorite waterfront restaurant. The house became our sanctuary, every room telling a story of our journey together. The living room with its stone fireplace, where we spent Christmas mornings opening presents and summer evenings playing board games. The kitchen where I taught her to make my grandmother's famous chocolate chip cookies, flour dusting every surface as we laughed and shared stories. The home office where she practiced her presentation skills for college interviews, where I helped her prepare for job interviews, where we celebrated her acceptance letter to Washington State University.
I was proud of what we had built together, proud of the young woman who said please and thank you without being reminded, who brought coworkers home for dinner parties, who seemed to understand that family came first, always. When Haley struggled with her first heartbreak at 19, she cried on my shoulder. When she faced the stress of her final marketing certification exam, we studied together at our kitchen table until she felt confident and prepared. We were a team, a unit, a family that had survived abandonment and financial uncertainty while still managing to laugh together most evenings. I thought I knew exactly who my daughter was and what our relationship meant to both of us. I had no idea that within 3 weeks, I would be sitting in this boardroom holding termination papers that would teach her the true cost of betraying the mother who had secretly controlled her destiny from the shadows, ensuring her success while preparing for the day she might choose to destroy the woman who had made it all possible. Haley had always been my dreamer, the kind of child who painted elaborate murals on her bedroom walls and talked about changing the world through creative marketing campaigns that would make people care about important causes. She inherited her father's artistic eye, but thankfully not his wanderlust, choosing instead to build her career in Seattle, where she could remain close to the mother who had been her anchor through every storm. When she landed the position at Wallace & Associates 3 years ago, I watched from the shadows as she flourished in an environment I had carefully curated to nurture talent like hers. Marcus Renford, the company's managing director, who reported directly to me through a series of shell corporations, had been instructed to evaluate all candidates fairly, but I couldn't help feeling proud when he called to tell me that Haley Wallace was the most impressive candidate they'd seen in years. Her portfolio was stunning, her interview was confident and articulate, and her references painted a picture of someone with both creative vision and practical business sense. She had earned her position legitimately, which made her subsequent betrayal all the more devastating. The Mercer Island house had been our castle, our refuge from a world that didn't always understand single-parent families. I had bought it when Haley was 8 years old, using the first major return on my grandmother's inheritance, combined with a mortgage that stretched my budget to its absolute limit. The realtor, Kelly Sully, had warned me that I was reaching too high, that a more modest home might be more practical for a single mother. But I knew that children needed stability, needed to believe their mothers were capable of creating magic even when resources were limited. Every room in that house held memories that money couldn't replace. The master bedroom, where Haley would crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, where we would stay up late talking about her dreams and fears. The guest room that had been transformed into her art studio when she turned 16, filled with easels and paints and half-finished canvases that capture her evolving vision of the world. The basement that became her college preparation center, where she spread out applications and scholarship essays across folding tables, while I provided encouragement and proofreading services. But it was the kitchen that truly defined our relationship. A bright, airy space with granite countertops and a breakfast nook overlooking the garden, where I had taught her everything I knew about cooking, about budgeting, about making a house feel like a home. We had hosted Thanksgiving dinners for her college friends who couldn't make it home, Christmas cookie exchanges with neighbors, and countless ordinary Tuesday night dinners where she shared the details of her work life while I listened with the careful attention of someone who understood her professional challenges better than she could possibly imagine. Haley's career at Wallace & Associates had been meteoric from the start. She specialized in nonprofit marketing, developing campaigns for environmental organizations and social justice causes that aligned with her personal values. Her work was innovative, effective, and recognized throughout the Seattle marketing community. She had won 3 industry awards in her 3 years with the company.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Each one celebrated with dinner at our favorite restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay, where she would share her excitement about upcoming projects and her gratitude for the mother who had made her success possible. What she didn't know was that I had been quietly steering high-profile clients toward the company, ensuring that Wallace & Associates had the kind of prestigious accounts that would showcase her talents. When the Seattle Children's Hospital needed a marketing firm for their capital campaign, I made sure they knew about our company's expertise. When the Pacific Northwest Environmental Coalition was looking for creative partners, I arranged introductions that led to a $1 million contract that established Haley as one of the city's most promising young marketers.
Our relationship had always been built on honesty and mutual respect. Or so I believed. Haley consulted me about major life decisions, from her choice of university to her decision to specialize in nonprofit marketing, to her recent consideration of buying her own home. We talked several times a week, sharing everything from workplace gossip to dating adventures to her concerns about my health as I approached my 50th birthday. She knew about my chronic back problems, the result of a car accident during her senior year of high school that had required multiple surgeries and left me with ongoing pain that I managed through physical therapy and careful attention to my limitations. She had been wonderfully supportive during my previous medical procedures, taking time off work to drive me to appointments and staying overnight at the house to help with recovery tasks that were difficult to manage alone. When my condition worsened 6 months ago, requiring emergency spinal fusion surgery that would keep me hospitalized for at least a week, Haley immediately volunteered to handle everything while I focused on healing. She had keys to the house, access to my emergency financial accounts, and my complete trust to make whatever decisions were necessary to keep my life running smoothly during my absence. I thought I had raised a daughter who understood that family meant loyalty, that trust was sacred, that the woman who had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities would never be treated as an acceptable target for exploitation. I believed that our 26 years of shared history had created bonds that couldn't be broken by greed or selfishness or the kind of calculated betrayal that transforms children into strangers overnight. I was wrong about everything I thought I knew about the young woman I had raised, and my awakening to that reality would change both of our lives forever. The spinal fusion surgery had been scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late September, when the Seattle autumn was just beginning to paint the maple trees around our neighborhood in shades of gold and crimson. My neurosurgeon, Dr. Arla Renford, had explained that the procedure would involve fusing 3 vertebrae that had been deteriorating for years, a complex operation that would require general anesthesia for approximately 6 hours, followed by a minimum 5-day hospital stay for monitoring and initial recovery. Haley had taken the entire week off from Wallace & Associates, telling Marcus that she needed to care for her mother during a major medical procedure. I felt guilty about the impact on her career, knowing that she was working on a crucial campaign for the Seattle Symphony season launch, but she insisted that family came first and that her colleagues would understand. Marcus had been surprisingly supportive, telling her to take whatever time she needed and assuring her that the team could handle her projects during her absence. What I didn't know was that Marcus's understanding came from a different source than his natural compassion for employee-family situations. As the managing director of a company I secretly owned, he understood that keeping Rebecca Wells's daughter happy was a business imperative that transcended normal workplace policies. His generosity with Haley's leave request was actually an investment in maintaining the goodwill of his ultimate boss, though neither he nor Haley understood the true dynamics at play. The night before my surgery, we sat together in the living room of our Mercer Island home, sharing takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant and watching an old romantic comedy that had been one of our traditions since Haley was in high school. She curled up next to me on the sofa, her head on my shoulder like she used to do when she was small, occasionally reaching over to steal spring rolls from my container while we laughed at jokes we had memorized years earlier. "You're going to be fine, Mom," Haley said, her voice soft with the kind of confidence that only comes from genuine love and concern. "I've already arranged everything. I'll be here every day during visiting hours, and I've stocked the refrigerator with all your favorite comfort foods for when you come home. You just focus on healing and let me handle everything else." I looked down at this accomplished young woman who still called me Mom and worried about my well-being, and felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. This was what I had worked for all these years. Not just her professional success or her financial independence, but her capacity to love and care for others the way she had been loved and cared for. This was the proof that single motherhood could create something beautiful, that sacrifice and dedication could build the kind of character that would make any parent proud. "I love you, sweetheart," I said, meaning it in a way that encompassed everything we had been through together. "Thank you for being exactly who you are. I don't know what I did to deserve a daughter like you, but I'm grateful every single day." Haley squeezed my hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You gave me everything, Mom. Everything. Everything I am, everything I've accomplished. It all started with you believing in me when nobody else did. Now it's my turn to take care of you." For one perfect moment, sitting in that living room surrounded by the furniture we had chosen together and the life we had built together, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. I had raised a daughter who understood the value of family, who knew how to prioritize the people she loved above her own convenience, who would never let me face a medical crisis alone. I had no idea that within a week, I would be lying in a hospital bed discovering that the person I trusted most had sold our home out from under me while I was unconscious and vulnerable. I had no idea that my daughter's expressions of love and concern were already being calculated against an opportunity she had been planning for weeks, an opportunity that would require liquidating everything I had built to fund her vision of a future that didn't include the mother who had made it all possible. The surgery was scheduled for 6 a.m, and Haley drove me to Swedish Medical Center in the pre-dawn darkness, both of us quiet with the nervous energy that accompanies major medical procedures. She waited with me through the admission process, the pre-surgical consultations, and the final moments before I was wheeled into the operating room. The last thing I remembered before the anesthesia took hold was her voice, promising that she would be there when I woke up, that everything would be taken care of, that I could trust her completely. As the darkness closed over me, I felt the peaceful certainty that comes from knowing your most important relationships are solid, that the people you love would never use your vulnerability against you, that family bonds are stronger than any temporary crisis or opportunity that might test them. But while I lay unconscious on that operating table, fighting through complications that would extend my surgery from 6 hours to nearly 10, Haley was already setting in motion the betrayal that would destroy everything we had built together. While Dr. Renford worked to repair the damage in my spine, my daughter was meeting with real estate agents, discussing market valuations, and signing documents that would transfer ownership of our family home to strangers who saw it only as an investment opportunity rather than as the repository of 26 years of memories and dreams. The surgery itself was successful, but recovery was far more difficult than anyone had anticipated. What was supposed to be a 5-day hospital stay stretched into 8 days as my body struggled to heal from the extensive procedure. Infections set in at one of the surgical sites, requiring additional antibiotics and careful monitoring. My blood pressure became unstable, causing doctors to worry about potential cardiac complications. Pain medication left me disoriented and nauseated, and sleep came only in brief, restless intervals between nursing checks and medical procedures. During those 8 days, while I drifted in and out of consciousness, believing that my loving daughter was protecting our home and our life together, Haley was systematically dismantling everything I had worked to build. She was using my vulnerability as an opportunity, my trust as a weapon, and my love as a shield against the consequences of what she knew was an unforgivable betrayal. When I woke up 3 days later, everything I believed about love, trust, and family would be shattered beyond repair, and the daughter I thought I knew would reveal herself to be a stranger wearing my child's face. On my 8th day in the hospital, when the infection had finally cleared and Dr. Renford was optimistic about discharging me within 24 hours, Haley arrived for her daily visit carrying a bouquet of sunflowers and wearing the kind of bright smile that had always been her trademark when she was excited about something. She seemed more animated than she had been during the previous week, chattering about how well I looked and how eager she was to get me home where I could recover in familiar surroundings. "I've been keeping everything perfect for you, Mom," she said, arranging the flowers in a vase while describing the meals she had prepared and frozen for my homecoming. "The house is spotless, the garden is watered, and I've even organized all your medications so you won't have to worry about anything except getting stronger." There was something in her demeanor that felt slightly off, an edge of nervous energy that I attributed to the stress of managing her work responsibilities while spending every evening at the hospital. I was grateful for her dedication, touched by her commitment to my care, and completely unprepared for what I would discover when she finally drove me home the following afternoon. The ride from Swedish Medical Center to Mercer Island took place in golden October sunlight that made the familiar streets and landmarks seem almost magical after more than a week away. Haley drove carefully, mindful of my discomfort, while keeping up a steady stream of conversation about neighborhood news and workplace updates. She mentioned that Marcus had been understanding about her extended absence and that her colleagues had covered her responsibilities admirably. Everything seemed normal, comfortable, exactly what I needed after the ordeal of surgery and recovery. When we pulled into what I expected to be our driveway, I felt the first flutter of confusion. There was a large "Sold" sign planted in the front yard and a moving truck parked in the street with 2 men loading furniture onto its platform. For a moment, my pain medication-fogged brain couldn't process what I was seeing. I assumed we had taken a wrong turn, that Haley had driven to the wrong street by mistake. "Haley, I think we're at the wrong house," I said, squinting through the passenger window at the scene before us. "There's a moving truck here and someone has sold this place." Haley turned off the engine and sat for a moment in silence, her hands gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. When she finally looked at me, her expression had shifted from cheerful anticipation to something I couldn't identify: guilt, defiance, or perhaps a mixture of both.
"Mom, we need to talk about something," she said slowly. "There have been some changes while you were in the hospital. Some opportunities came up that I couldn't pass up, and I had to make some quick decisions." The words hit me like ice water, cutting through the remaining fog of medication and leaving me with a clarity that was both sharp and terrible. "What kind of decisions, Haley?" She took a deep breath, clearly having rehearsed this conversation during the drive from the hospital. "You know how I've been wanting to buy my own place downtown, closer to work? Well, this amazing condo came on the market in the Belltown district. It's perfect, Mom, exactly what I've been dreaming of. But the seller needed a cash offer and they were only giving buyers 3 days to decide." I stared at her, my mind struggling to connect her words to the moving truck in front of our house, to the sold sign that seemed to grow larger and more ominous with each passing second. "I don't understand," I said, though part of me was beginning to understand exactly what she was telling me. "What does your downtown condo have to do with our house?" "I used the house as collateral," she said quickly, the words rushing out as if speed could somehow soften their impact. "I was able to get a cash advance against the equity, but then the market shifted and the financing fell through, so I had to sell the house to cover the commitments I'd already made." The world seemed to tilt sideways as the full scope of her betrayal became clear. While I had been fighting for my life in a hospital bed, trusting her to protect everything we had built together, my daughter had gambled away our home for her own real estate ambitions. She had used my vulnerability as an opportunity to liquidate the foundation of our family life, betting that she could manipulate the situation to her advantage before I was conscious enough to stop her. "You sold our house," I said. Not as a question, but as a statement of fact that I needed to speak out loud to make it real. "You sold our house while I was unconscious in the hospital." "I sold my inheritance," she corrected, as if semantic precision could somehow make her actions acceptable. "This house was always going to be mine eventually, and I just accelerated the timeline to take advantage of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The downtown condo will appreciate much faster than this old place, and the lifestyle will be so much better for both of us." Both of us. She was still operating under the assumption that I would be part of her new life, that I would simply accept her decision and adapt to whatever living arrangements she had made without consulting me. The audacity of that assumption was almost as devastating as the theft itself. "Where exactly am I supposed to live while you enjoy your downtown lifestyle?" I asked, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. For the first time since starting this conversation, Haley looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Well, there's a really nice assisted living facility in Bellevue that has immediate availability. It's actually perfect timing because with your back problems and the surgery, you're going to need more support than I can provide while building my career. The staff there is amazing, and they specialize in post-surgical recovery." Assisted living. She had planned to warehouse me in an institution while she built her new life with the proceeds from selling everything I had worked 26 years to create. She had calculated that my medical condition would make me helpless to resist, that my dependence on her care would force me to accept whatever arrangements she had made for my future. As I sat in that car, staring at strangers loading my furniture onto a truck, while my daughter explained how she had solved the problem of caring for her aging mother, I felt something fundamental break inside me. Not my heart, which had been broken before and healed, but something deeper. My faith in the basic human decency of the person I had raised, my belief that family bonds could survive anything, my trust in the fundamental goodness of love freely given. The woman sitting next to me was no longer my daughter in any meaningful sense. She was a stranger who had used 26 years of maternal devotion as cover for the most calculating betrayal I could have imagined. She had transformed my love into a weakness she could exploit, and my trust into a weapon she could wield against me. The moving truck pulled away from the curb, carrying the last remnants of the life I had built, while my daughter waited for me to thank her for arranging my exile with such thoughtful efficiency. The silence that followed Haley's explanation stretched between us like a chasm that had opened suddenly in familiar ground. I could hear the distant sound of traffic on Interstate 90, the rustle of autumn leaves in the maple trees that would no longer shade my morning coffee, the ordinary sounds of a world that had continued spinning while mine had stopped entirely.
Mom, you're being very quiet, Haley said finally, her voice taking on the patient tone she used when explaining marketing concepts to clients she considered less sophisticated. I know this is a lot to process, but once you see the numbers, you'll understand that this was actually the smartest financial decision for our family's long-term security. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder thick with documents, spreading them across the dashboard with the confident efficiency of someone who had prepared for this presentation. Bank statements, real estate valuations, market analyses, and what appeared to be a detailed financial projection spanning the next 10 years.
"Look at this," she said, pointing to highlighted figures that meant nothing to me in my state of shock. The house sold for $850,000, which is $30,000 more than the assessed value. I was able to negotiate a quick closing because of the cash offer situation, and after paying off the remaining mortgage and closing costs, we netted about $620,000 in liquid assets. She continued to use that pronoun as if we had made this decision together, as if my unconsciousness had somehow constituted consent to the destruction of everything I valued. My downtown condo cost $410,000, which means there's still over $200,000 left for your care at Sunset Manor. Mom, that's enough to cover your assisted living costs for at least 4 years, maybe 5 if we're careful about the extras. And by then, my condo will have appreciated enough that we'll have even more options. The casual way she discussed my institutionalization, as if warehousing your aging mother was simply another line item in a comprehensive financial plan, revealed a coldness I had never suspected existed beneath her artistic sensitivity. She had calculated the cost of disposing of me with the same analytical precision she brought to marketing campaigns. 4 years, I repeated slowly. You've budgeted 4 years for me to live in assisted living while you enjoy the downtown condo you bought with my house. Not my condo, she corrected, her voice brightening as if she had been waiting for me to ask about this detail. Our condo, it's actually in both our names, so you're building equity too. I thought you'd appreciate the legal protection that provides. The audacity of her assumption that I would be grateful for partial ownership of property purchased with my stolen assets was breathtaking. She had convinced herself that including my name on the deed somehow transformed theft into family financial planning. Haley, I said carefully, did it occur to you to discuss this decision with me before you made it? Her expression shifted to mild exasperation, as if I were being deliberately obtuse about obvious practical constraints. Mom, you were unconscious for most of the week, and when you were awake, you were so medicated that you couldn't focus on complex financial discussions. The market opportunity wasn't going to wait for your recovery timeline, so you decided to sell my house without my permission because I was too sick to stop you. I decided to optimize our family's financial position during a narrow window of opportunity, she replied, her marketing background evident in her ability to reframe theft as strategic asset management. Sometimes you have to make difficult decisions for people you love when they're not capable of making those decisions themselves. The paternalistic tone in her voice, the suggestion that my medical vulnerability had somehow transferred decision-making authority to her, revealed the depth of her entitlement. In Haley's mind, my role as her mother had evolved into a form of guardianship that flowed in reverse. She now had the right to make major life decisions on my behalf, because she had determined that her judgment was superior to mine. What if I don't want to live in assisted living? I asked. What if I want my house back? For the first time since beginning her presentation, Haley looked genuinely surprised by my response. Mom, that's not possible. The sale is final, and the new owners are already moving in. Besides, with your back problems and the recovery time you're facing, independent living just isn't realistic anymore. She spoke as if my physical limitations were permanent and debilitating, as if spinal fusion surgery had transformed me from a competent adult into someone who required institutional care. The fact that Dr. Renford had predicted a full recovery within 6 months seemed irrelevant to her narrative about my diminished capacity. You've thought of everything, I said, and Haley smiled, clearly interpreting my words as acknowledgement of her thoroughness rather than recognition of her betrayal. I really have, Mom. I know this is hard right now, but in a year you'll see that this was the best thing that could have happened to us. We'll both be in better situations and we'll have financial security that we never could have achieved by just sitting on an aging house in the suburbs. As she gathered her documents back into their folder, clearly satisfied with her presentation, I realized that Haley genuinely believed she had acted in our mutual best interests. She had convinced herself that stealing my home was an act of love, that my devastation was simply resistance to change rather than response to betrayal. The daughter I thought I had raised would never have been capable of such calculated cruelty, but the woman sitting beside me had revealed herself to be someone I had never known at all. The next 3 weeks at Sunset Manor in Bellevue became a master class in psychological manipulation disguised as filial concern. Haley visited me every other day, bringing flowers and magazines while carefully monitoring my emotional state and adjusting her approach based on my responses to her betrayal. She had clearly researched strategies for managing difficult family transitions, approaching my resistance with the same systematic methodology she used for challenging marketing campaigns. Her first tactic was financial intimidation wrapped in expressions of practical concern. She would arrive with updated spreadsheets showing the cost of my care, emphasizing how quickly my share of the house proceeds would be depleted if I didn't embrace the most economical options for my future.
Mom, I've been working with the financial advisor at Sunset Manor, and we need to talk about your spending habits, she said during one particularly condescending visit, spreading documents across the small table in my temporary room. The premium meal plan you requested is adding almost $200 a month to your costs. If we're going to make your resources last, we need to be more realistic about what you actually need versus what you think you want. The irony of receiving budgeting advice from someone who had gambled away my home for a downtown condo was not lost on me. But Haley delivered her financial lectures with such earnest concern that anyone overhearing might have thought I was a spendthrift, being guided by a responsible daughter, rather than a theft victim being controlled by her thief. When financial pressure failed to produce the grateful acceptance she expected, Haley shifted to emotional manipulation, designed to make me feel guilty for not appreciating her sacrifice. She began arriving at visits looking tired and stressed, sighing heavily while describing the challenges of managing her demanding career while caring for an aging mother who refused to cooperate with reasonable care arrangements. "I'm really struggling, Mom," she said one afternoon, her voice trembling with what appeared to be genuine emotion. "Marcus has been understanding, but I can tell my colleagues are starting to notice that I'm distracted. I'm trying to balance everything: my job, my new condo payments, your care costs, the emotional stress of watching you reject every solution I've worked so hard to arrange for you." She painted herself as the martyred daughter bearing an unfair burden, while I played the role of the ungrateful mother making her life unnecessarily difficult. Her performance was sophisticated enough that I found myself momentarily feeling sorry for her, questioning whether my anger about the house sale was preventing me from appreciating her genuine efforts to help me. But the manipulation that revealed her true character was her systematic campaign to convince the Sunset Manor staff that my objections to being there stemmed from cognitive difficulties related to my surgery, rather than legitimate anger about having my home stolen. She would speak to nurses and social workers in hushed tones about my confusion and disorientation, suggesting that my complaints about the house sale were evidence of memory problems rather than accurate recollections of her betrayal. "She keeps insisting that I sold her house without permission," I overheard her telling my assigned social worker, Kelly Renford. "But the truth is, we made this decision together before her surgery. She's just having trouble remembering the conversations we had about assisted living because of the anesthesia and pain medications." Kelly nodded sympathetically, making notes in my file, while Haley continued her fictional account of our family decision-making process. According to her version of events, I had actively participated in choosing Sunset Manor and had only begun expressing confusion and resistance after the surgery affected my memory and judgment.
The most insidious aspect of this gaslighting campaign was how it made me question my own memories and perceptions. When multiple healthcare professionals began treating me as if I were experiencing cognitive difficulties, when they spoke to me with the patient condescension reserved for confused elderly patients, I found myself doubting the clarity of my own recollections about the house sale. Had we discussed assisted living before my surgery? Had I somehow agreed to sell the house during a pain medication-induced conversation that I couldn't remember? The uncertainty was maddening, made worse by the fact that questioning my own memory only reinforced the staff's perception that I was in fact experiencing the cognitive issues Haley had described. But Haley's most devastating manipulation was her gradual revelation that my financial dependence on her was complete and permanent. During what she called reality check conversations, she would explain that my age and medical history made independent living impossible, that my resources were insufficient to support any lifestyle other than institutional care, and that my only choice was to accept her decisions gracefully or face abandonment entirely. "Mom, I need you to understand something," she said during a particularly brutal conversation 3 weeks into my stay at Sunset Manor. "I'm 26 years old, and I have my whole life ahead of me. I can't put my career and my future on hold indefinitely to manage someone who refuses to accept help. If you keep fighting me on every decision I make for your benefit, I'm going to have to step back and let the state take over your care." The threat was delivered with such calm reasonableness that it took me several moments to process what she was actually saying. My own daughter was threatening to abandon me to state guardianship if I didn't stop objecting to her theft of my home and my autonomy. That night, lying in the narrow bed at Sunset Manor, while listening to other displaced elderly people trying to sleep in institutional comfort, I finally understood that the loving daughter I had raised existed only in my memories. The woman who visited me with flowers and financial advice was someone else entirely, someone who saw my love as a weakness to exploit and my vulnerability as an opportunity to control every aspect of my remaining years. The next morning, I made a phone call that would change everything.
The phone call I made that morning was to Arla Wells, my estate attorney who had been managing my business interests for the past 15 years. Arla was the only person who knew the full scope of my financial holdings, including my majority ownership stake in Wallace & Associates Marketing. She was also the only person I trusted completely to understand that my current situation was the result of theft rather than family crisis management. "Rebecca, I've been wondering when you'd call," Arla said without preamble when she heard my voice. "I received some interesting paperwork last week regarding the sale of your Mercer Island property. Since you never mentioned any intention to sell, and since you were hospitalized at the time of the transaction, I took the liberty of having my paralegal investigate the circumstances." Relief flooded through me as I realized that someone with actual legal authority had been monitoring the situation. "Arla, I need to see you immediately. My daughter has stolen my house, institutionalized me against my will, and is systematically destroying my autonomy while convincing everyone that I'm mentally incompetent." "I can be there in an hour," she replied. "And Rebecca, bring any documentation Haley has given you about the house sale and your current living arrangements. We're going to need everything." When Arla arrived at Sunset Manor, she brought with her a briefcase full of documents that would transform my understanding of exactly how much power I actually possessed. While Haley had been calculating ways to control my diminished resources, she had remained completely unaware that her mother controlled resources that dwarfed anything she could imagine. "Let's start with the obvious," Arla said, spreading papers across the small table in my room. "The house sale was conducted using a forged power of attorney document. Haley somehow obtained a copy of your signature from your medical records and used it to create legal authorization for the transaction. That's identity theft, fraud, and elder abuse under Washington state law." She showed me copies of the real estate documents, including the power of attorney that bore my signature, but which I had never signed. The forgery was sophisticated enough to pass initial scrutiny, but a handwriting analysis would easily prove its fraudulent nature.
More importantly, Arla continued, Haley seems to have forgotten that she's currently employed by a company you own. Wallace & Associates Marketing has been one of your most profitable investments, and as majority shareholder, you have the authority to make immediate changes to personnel and company policy. The irony was staggering. While my daughter was threatening to abandon me to state care, she was completely dependent on my business interests for her livelihood, her career advancement, and her professional reputation. The prestigious job she had used to justify stealing my house existed entirely at my discretion. What are my options? I asked, though I was beginning to formulate a plan that would teach Haley exactly how power dynamics actually worked in our family. Arla smiled with the predatory satisfaction of an attorney who had identified multiple avenues for devastating legal action. We can pursue criminal charges for the fraudulent house sale, which would likely result in prison time and the automatic reversal of the transaction. But that's the nuclear option. We might want to start with something more educational. She explained that my position as silent owner of Wallace & Associates gave me several strategic advantages. I could terminate Haley's employment immediately, I could ensure that her professional references would reflect her criminal activity, and I could use the company's resources to investigate and document every aspect of her fraudulent behavior. More subtly, Arla continued, we can begin restructuring your financial arrangements to ensure that someone who steals from you can't benefit from your resources in any capacity. The condo she purchased with your stolen money, we can make her mortgage payments impossible to maintain. The career she's built at your company, we can ensure that her professional reputation becomes unmarketable throughout the Seattle business community. But the most satisfying revelation was that my apparent helplessness at Sunset Manor was entirely voluntary. As someone with substantial financial resources and clear mental capacity, I could leave at any time, establish new living arrangements that suited my preferences, and hire whatever support services I needed during my recovery. Rebecca, you're not a victim, Arla said firmly. You're a successful businesswoman who has been temporarily outmaneuvered by someone who doesn't understand the scope of your actual capabilities. Haley has been playing checkers while you control the chessboard. That afternoon, we began implementing what Arla called Operation Reality Check, a systematic campaign to educate my daughter about the true balance of power in our relationship. The first step was my immediate discharge and relocation to a luxury extended stay hotel in downtown Seattle, where I could recover in comfort while planning Haley's comprehensive education in the consequences of betraying someone who had been protecting her from the shadows for years. The second step would be a phone call to Marcus Renford, instructing him to schedule an emergency board meeting at Wallace & Associates to discuss immediate personnel changes. By the time Haley arrived for her next visit at Sunset Manor, she would discover that her mother had vanished, leaving behind only a note with the address of my new accommodations and an invitation to discuss our family's future on terms that reflect our actual respective positions.
The war my daughter had declared by stealing my house was about to become a masterclass in the difference between temporary vulnerability and permanent powerlessness. She was about to learn that the woman she had underestimated wasn't just her mother. She was the invisible architect of everything Haley thought she had earned through her own merit. Haley's discovery that I had vanished from Sunset Manor triggered a panic response that revealed the depths of her desperation and entitlement. When she arrived for her scheduled visit to find my room empty and a hotel address in place of the compliant mother she expected to manipulate, her careful facade of concerned daughter managing a family crisis crumbled entirely. Her first call came at 11 that night, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Mom, what the hell do you think you're doing? I just spent 2 hours at Sunset Manor being interrogated by staff members who think I've lost track of my own mother. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for me?" Even in her fury, Haley's primary concern was her own reputation and convenience, rather than my well-being or the legitimacy of my decision to leave an institution I had never chosen to enter. Her assumption that my escape was somehow an assault on her dignity, rather than an assertion of my autonomy, revealed how completely she had inverted our relationship in her mind.
I'm staying at the Fairmont Olympic, room 1247. We need to have a conversation about our family's future, and this time it will take place on neutral ground, where you can't manipulate the staff into treating me like a confused elderly patient. You can't just leave assisted living without a discharge plan, she said, her voice taking on the condescending tone she used when explaining obvious concepts to slow clients. There are procedures, medical protocols, insurance requirements. You're putting yourself at risk and creating a legal nightmare that I'll have to solve. The assumption that she would be solving anything related to my life moving forward was about to be corrected, but I wanted her to dig herself deeper into the hole of entitlement before I revealed exactly how powerless she actually was. When Haley arrived at my hotel suite the next morning, she came armed with printouts, medical documents, and what appeared to be a prepared presentation about responsible care planning for recovering surgical patients. She had clearly spent the night researching legal precedents for family intervention in cases where elderly patients made poor decisions about their living arrangements. Mom, I've been talking to elder care attorneys, and they all agree that someone in your condition shouldn't be making major decisions without family consultation. She began, settling into the chair across from me with the confident demeanor of someone who believed she held all the cards. The hotel is a temporary solution at best, and the costs are going to eat through your resources much faster than assisted living would. She spread financial projections across the coffee table, highlighting the daily cost of luxury hotel accommodations versus institutional care. According to her calculations, my current living arrangement would exhaust my available funds within 8 months, leaving me dependent on her charity for basic survival needs. More importantly, she continued, you're isolating yourself from the medical support system you need during recovery. What happens if you fall in the bathroom? What happens if you have a medication reaction? Who's going to monitor your physical therapy compliance? Her questions were designed to highlight my vulnerability and dependence, to convince me that independence was a dangerous fantasy that would ultimately require her intervention to prevent disaster. But Haley's most revealing moment came when she began describing the social embarrassment my behavior was causing her at work. She had apparently spent considerable time explaining to her colleagues at Wallace & Associates why she had been distracted and emotionally unavailable, presenting herself as the devoted daughter struggling to manage a mother whose post-surgical confusion was creating unprecedented family drama. Marcus has been incredibly understanding, but I can tell he's concerned about my ability to focus on the Morrison account while dealing with your instability, she said, unconsciously providing me with valuable information about how she had been characterizing our situation to my employees. I've built a reputation as someone who handles family responsibilities professionally, and your erratic behavior is undermining everything I've worked to achieve. The irony of her complaint was breathtaking. My daughter was worried that my refusal to quietly accept theft and institutionalization was damaging her professional reputation at the company I secretly owned, where every colleague she was impressing with her family management skills was ultimately accountable to the mother she had betrayed. When emotional manipulation and practical arguments failed to convince me to return to Sunset Manor, Haley escalated to direct threats designed to force my compliance through fear and isolation. She began describing the legal steps she was prepared to take to assume guardianship over someone whose post-surgical mental state had clearly been compromised by trauma and medication.
I didn't want it to come to this, she said, her voice shifting to cold determination. But if you continue making decisions that put yourself at risk, I'm going to have to petition the court for conservatorship. I have documentation from Sunset Manor staff about your confusion and paranoid accusations. I have medical records showing your extended anesthesia exposure and pain medication dependence. Any judge would agree that someone in your condition needs supervised care. She was threatening to legally steal my autonomy after criminally stealing my home, apparently believing that my love for her would prevent me from defending myself against her escalating attacks. But what Haley didn't understand was that the woman she was threatening was not the vulnerable mother she had been manipulating for the past month.
Tomorrow, she would discover exactly who she had been underestimating when Marcus Renford called her into his office for a conversation that would change her understanding of power dynamics forever. The call came at exactly 9:30 on a Wednesday morning, while Haley was at her desk working on the Morrison account presentation she had been using to demonstrate her professional dedication despite her family difficulties. Marcus Renford's assistant informed her that she was needed in the executive conference room immediately for an urgent meeting regarding her employment status. According to Marcus later, Haley entered the conference room with the confident stride of someone who expected recognition from managing a challenging personal situation while maintaining her professional responsibilities. She had apparently prepared talking points about her renewed focus and availability now that her mother's care situation had been stabilized through appropriate family intervention. What she found instead was Marcus seated at the head of the conference table with two people she didn't recognize: Arla Wells, my estate attorney, and Paul Sully, the private investigator I had hired to document every aspect of her fraudulent behavior. The documents spread across the table weren't performance reviews or project assignments, but police reports, fraud investigations, and termination paperwork. "Haley, please sit down," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral but lacking the warmth she had grown accustomed to during their previous interactions. "We've received some disturbing information about activities you've been engaged in outside of work that directly impact your position with this company." Arla took over the presentation with the clinical precision of someone who had been preparing for this moment for weeks. She explained that Wallace & Associates had conducted a thorough investigation into Haley's recent financial activities after receiving reports of potential criminal behavior by one of their employees. "The forgery of your mother's signature on real estate documents constitutes identity theft under Washington state law," Arla explained, sliding copies of the handwriting analysis across the table. "The unauthorized sale of her property while she was incapacitated constitutes elder abuse and financial exploitation. These are felony charges that carry prison sentences and automatic disqualification from professional licensing in marketing and related fields." Haley's composure cracked as she realized that her secret criminal activity had somehow become the subject of a formal workplace investigation. She began stammering explanations about family financial management and emergency decision-making, but Arla cut her off with a gesture. "More relevant to your employment status," Arla continued, "is the fact that your victim happens to be the majority shareholder of Wallace & Associates Marketing. Rebecca Wells has been the silent owner of this company for the past 7 years, which means you've been stealing from your own boss while using her business success to build your career." The revelation hit Haley like a physical blow. Her face went white as she processed the implications of having systematically victimized the person who controlled every aspect of her professional life. The prestigious job she had used to justify stealing my house existed entirely at my discretion, and she had been building her reputation on the foundation of my business acumen while planning my destruction. Marcus delivered the final blow with professional courtesy that couldn't disguise his personal disgust. "Effective immediately, your employment with Wallace & Associates is terminated. Security will escort you from the building, and all company property, including your laptop and client files, will be retained pending the criminal investigation." As Haley was led from the conference room by security guards, the career she had built through stolen resources crumpled as completely as the family relationship she had destroyed through betrayal. The criminal charges were filed within 24 hours of Haley's termination, and the subsequent legal proceedings moved with the swift efficiency that comes when evidence is overwhelming and the defendant's position is indefensible. Fraud, elder abuse, identity theft, and conspiracy charges painted a comprehensive picture of systematic predatory behavior that extended far beyond a single moment of poor judgment during a family crisis. But the real transformation wasn't happening in the courtroom. It was happening within me as I rediscovered who Rebecca Wells was when she wasn't defined entirely by her role as Haley's mother. For 26 years, I had built my identity around protecting, providing for, and sacrificing for someone who had ultimately seen my love as a resource to be exploited rather than a gift to be treasured.
Moving into my new condominium in downtown Seattle,
A luxury unit I purchased with my own money for my own preferences became a process of reclaiming autonomy I hadn't realized I had surrendered. Every piece of furniture I chose reflected my taste rather than family functionality. Every decoration served my aesthetic pleasure rather than creating an environment designed to make other people comfortable. The physical therapy for my spinal recovery became a metaphor for emotional healing as well. Dr. Renford had warned that rebuilding strength after major surgery required patience, consistency, and acceptance that some days would be more difficult than others. The same principles applied to rebuilding a sense of self after discovering that your most important relationship had been built on systematic manipulation rather than mutual love. My business interests, which I had managed quietly from the shadows for years while prioritizing family obligations, suddenly demanded more direct attention. Wallace & Associates required restructuring after the removal of a key employee whose criminal behavior had created liability issues. My other investments needed strategic adjustments to reflect my changed circumstances and priorities. But the most profound change was learning to make decisions based on my own needs and desires rather than on what would benefit or convenience other people. For the first time in decades, I woke up each morning asking what I wanted to accomplish rather than what others needed from me. The freedom was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. Building a life centered on your own fulfillment requires different skills than building a life centered on other people's happiness. I had to relearn how to prioritize my own comfort, how to pursue interests that served no purpose beyond my personal satisfaction, how to form relationships based on mutual respect rather than on my willingness to provide services. The woman emerging from this process was someone I had never had the opportunity to meet before. Rebecca Wells as an independent person, rather than as someone's mother, someone's caregiver, or someone's support system. She was stronger than the woman who had raised Haley, less trusting but more discerning, less willing to sacrifice but more capable of genuine affection. Most importantly, she understood that love without respect is simply another form of exploitation, and that the most loving thing you can sometimes do for someone is to stop enabling their worst impulses, even when the cost is losing them entirely. 6 months after Haley's conviction, I received a letter forwarded through Arla's office to ensure no direct contact that might violate the restraining order that had been established during the legal proceedings. The letter was written on plain paper in Haley's careful handwriting, and its tone was markedly different from the entitled justifications and emotional manipulations that had characterized our previous communications. She wrote about her community service work at a Seattle homeless shelter, describing how the experience had given her perspective on the vulnerability she had exploited during my hospitalization. She mentioned that losing her career in marketing had forced her to take a job as a retail clerk, and that the financial struggle of supporting herself without family resources had taught her lessons about the value of what she had destroyed. The letter concluded with what appeared to be a genuine apology, though it was carefully worded to avoid legal implications. Quote, "I understand now that what I did was wrong in ways I didn't comprehend at the time. I hope someday you can forgive me, not because I deserve it, but because holding on to anger might be hurting you more than it's hurting me. I miss the mother I remember from before everything went wrong." End quote. I read the letter twice, then filed it away without responding. Not because I was angry or vindictive, but because I understood that the mother Haley missed had been a woman who existed primarily to serve other people's needs, and that version of me was gone forever. The peace I had found didn't require her forgiveness or understanding. It was built on my own recognition of my worth and my refusal to accept relationships that required me to disappear. My new life had settled into rhythms that reflected my actual preferences rather than accommodations to other people's schedules. I had joined a book club composed of women who appreciated literature and intelligent conversation. I had begun taking photography classes, discovering an artistic side that had been dormant during the years when my creative energy was channeled entirely into creating opportunities for my daughter. Most significantly, I had started dating Toby Sully, the contractor who had renovated my kitchen years earlier and who had remained a friend through the decades when I was too focused on single motherhood to consider romantic relationships. At 61, Toby was patient with my healing process, respectful of my independence, and interested in building something together rather than being taken care of or taking care of someone else. The downtown Seattle condominium I had purchased overlooked Elliott Bay, and I spent many evenings on the balcony watching ferries navigate between the islands while reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this place of solitude and strength. The view was different from the suburban garden I had tended for 26 years, but it was mine in a way that nothing had ever been mine before. Sometimes, late at night, when the city lights reflected off the water like scattered stars, I would think about the mother I had been and feel a complex mixture of gratitude and sadness. Gratitude for the lessons that betrayal had taught me about my resilience, and sadness for the years I had spent believing that love meant self-erasure.
But mostly, I felt the deep contentment that comes from finally understanding that the most important relationship you can have is the one with yourself, and that no external validation can substitute for genuine self-respect. 2 years after the trial, on a crisp November morning that reminded me of the day I had first discovered Haley's betrayal, I stood in the boardroom of Wallace & Associates reviewing quarterly reports with Marcus and the management team I had assembled to guide the company's continued growth. The marketing firm had not only survived the scandal of having a criminal employee, but had thrived under more direct leadership that emphasized ethical business practices and genuine client service. Marcus had proven himself to be an excellent managing director, once freed from the complicated dynamics of managing someone whose mother secretly owned the company. Our working relationship was built on mutual respect and shared commitment to building something meaningful rather than on the hidden power structures that had previously defined the business environment. "Rebecca, I have to ask," Marcus said as we concluded the meeting and other staff members filed out of the conference room, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if Haley had known from the beginning that you owned the company? If you had been open about your business success instead of letting her believe she was succeeding entirely on her own merit?" It was a question I had asked myself many times during the rebuilding process, and I had concluded that the answer revealed something important about character that transcended circumstances. I think someone who would steal from their unconscious mother would also steal from their successful mother, I replied. The problem wasn't that she didn't know about my money. The problem was that she saw me as someone whose resources existed for her benefit regardless of my consent. That afternoon, I drove to Mercer Island for the first time since the house sale, parking across the street from the property where I had raised Haley and built what I thought was an unshakable foundation of family love. The new owners had painted the exterior and modified the landscaping, but the basic structure remained the same. Children played in the backyard where Haley had once painted murals and dreamed of changing the world through art. Watching those children laugh and chase each other around the swing set that had survived the ownership transition, I felt something I hadn't expected, genuine happiness for the family that was creating new memories in a space that had once held all of mine. The house had moved on, and so had I. Driving back to my downtown condominium as the Seattle skyline glowed in the late afternoon sun, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from that moment of devastating betrayal to this place of hard-won peace. I had learned that some relationships are worth preserving at any cost, while others are worth ending at any cost. I had discovered that the difference lies not in the intensity of love shared, but in the presence or absence of fundamental respect. Most importantly, I had finally understood that being alone and being lonely are completely different experiences. The woman sitting in traffic on Interstate 90, returning to a home she had chosen for herself and a life built according to her own values, was neither victim nor villain in someone else's story. She was simply Rebecca Wells, finally free to discover who that person could become when she stopped disappearing in service of other people's dreams. The rest of my story was mine to write, and for the first time in decades, I was eager to see what came next.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.